I really think awareness and alertness, you could call it. I think alertness is kind of what happens when a person is aware, right? So awareness is just that seeing what's happening as it's happening, seeing the relationship between things, which is to say recognizing patterns and recognizing patterns between patterns. I was talking to someone on the phone the other day, recognizing meta patterns. So for example, if you've got a self-sabotage pattern, knowing that is one thing, knowing what sets that pattern off is another. You know what I'm saying? That would be a meta pattern. So I've got a pattern of doing really well for when I start something and then I screw it up, or then I fall off. I stop doing what works or start doing what doesn't work, right? That's a pattern. Well, but there are also patterns usually that are governing kind of the manifestation of that pattern. So for example, the question, how do you know when it's time to? And that's what I was helping someone do the other day, because we had identified a lot of his patterns over and over again, but he keeps doing them, right? And he says, I'm aware and nothing's changing. And that to me is just sort of like a big admission of ignorance, which is to say that like that's a person who thinks that they know more than they do. And that's really detrimental to the individual, because there are few states more harmful than self-assured ignorance, or we could say thinking I'm aware of everything that there is to be aware of in a particular area when I'm not, which is almost always the case. You know what I'm saying? And so basically we needed to give him something new to become aware of, and so it was patterns governing patterns, and about how awareness and alertness, which is this trait that develops, this sort of awareness in action, you're listening to, you're watching the reality of what's happening right in front of you. In NLP, they used to talk about downtime and uptime, and about how a lot of people in general, therapists in particular, would be too engaged with what was going on inside their own head and engaged with the consequences of their own strategies for processing the information that their clients or patients were supplying them, to be able to actually hear literally what their patients and clients are saying, which is a big problem, because oftentimes your clients and your patients will tell you exactly what they're doing that isn't working and what they don't like and why they aren't doing more of what will work and all this different stuff. And one of the interesting things about awareness is I think that it's a cultivation of this ability to be plugged into what's going on around you, rather than distracted by kind of extraneous or superfluous information processing things you've got going on in your head. You've got projections, misinterpretations, and stuff like that, right? And awareness and then alertness is therefore kind of an antidote against manipulation. That manipulation is not, manipulativeness is not a characteristic of an individual, right? Manipulation isn't something that happens when one person has nefarious intentions about how to influence you. Manipulation is something that, that's not a necessary condition for manipulation, and two, it's not a sufficient condition. So you can have manipulation occurring in an instance where the party that's doing the manipulating has no conscious intention to do it, right? And you can also have manipulation in a situation in which, so you can have it without the person intending to do it, right? And you have to have it, even if, let's say, that person is intending to manipulate, the other person has to supply sufficient influenceability, sufficient credulity. They have to be open to the manipulation. Now, not consciously, obviously, but rarely is the most relevant aspect of ourselves conscious at a given moment in time. And so I think that recognizing that manipulation is what happens when two people with certain characteristics come together and interact in particular ways. It's not something that's done to you, it's something you participate in. And that applies if it's your significant other. Now, sometimes people are really nasty about how they do it, and they do it for really nasty ends. It doesn't change the fact, though, that there are things about me that made it possible for me to be manipulated, right? And the question isn't whether or not that means that I'm wrong, because I'm not interested in that question. The question is, are there things about me that could have been different, that, were they different, would have made me less vulnerable to this manipulative process, right? And so awareness is that, because what awareness allows you to do is it allows you to just observe the raw data of reality, experiential, phenomenological reality. What is happening in this conversation right here and right now? and what can I infer about what you're saying, the manner in which you're saying it, where you seem to be guiding me, right? And can I infer those things while being aware of the fact that they are inferences? You know what I'm saying? To what extent can I be aware of all that is going on here, not just what is ostensibly going on at the acknowledged social, interpersonal level? And when I'm aware, I can see things that I would not see were I not. I can see the mechanics of things that are happening. And so it reminded me of this kind of interesting thing that Barack Obama shared in 2016. So he's kind of on his way out, and he's got a Supreme Court nominee. And the thing that he shared said, and this was the thing, 2/3 of Americans think that President Obama's Supreme Court nominee should receive a fair hearing. Are you one of them? And I was thinking, well, that's an interesting kind of way to phrase that. The implication seems to be that like they did a poll, and that fully 1/3 of the people polled said, no, I think that President Obama's Supreme Court nominee should receive an unfair hearing, or that they should unfairly be deprived of a hearing, which is probably obviously not the case. You know what I'm saying? But when you phrase it in that way, the question is different than should President Obama's nominee, should they get the position? Should they do whatever? That wasn't it. It was a moralistic thing. It's just the 2/3, the majority, right? So the majority, you don't want to be on the side of the minority in most cases of moral rightness. The majority of people feel like fairness is the right way to go. Are you one of those people? And I thought, well, that's interesting how they're framing that. And I said, I bet a lot of people will probably see that and be influenced by it without recognizing what bullshit it is. Now, it doesn't matter what you think about Barack Obama, and it doesn't matter what you think about the Supreme Court nomination process, and it doesn't matter what you think about who the nominee was. I don't even really remember I can't even really recall which one it would have been, right? None of that matters. But the fact is, there's some bullshit going on right there. You know what I mean? There's some bullshit there, for sure. Can I detect it? I mean, a lot of people I feel like can tell maybe there's something there, but they can't quite see what it is. And one of the interesting kind of rules governing intrapersonal activity, but especially interpersonal activity, is that it's hard. I'm not allowed really to call bullshit on you or on something that's happening out here unless I can explain the mechanics of the bullshit. And so a lot of people, very often in politics or in personal life, will have a sense that something's not right. But not only can they not sort of officially register or submit that intuition that something's not right with another person, unless they can describe something about the structure and mechanics of that, what that thing that's not right is. Very often people aren't allowed to acknowledge to themselves that they have an intuition about something not being right, unless they have at least a skeleton framework for precisely what that thing is. You know what I mean? And so I think one of the things that awareness does, one, is that it allows you to detect those intuitions. And the more you see how often those intuitions are correct, the easier it becomes to kind of at least tentatively heed them in absence of a complete understanding of exactly how it's going to bear out. But the other thing is that it allows you to see more and more of the structure, right? Because obviously if you get the sense that something's not right, some part of you is absorbing this information and processing this information and creating a kind of kinesthetic representation of things being askew. You know what I mean? But maybe your conscious mind doesn't have access to that data or can't process that data in a way that allows you to kind of make a linear sort of da-da-da-da-da. That's why I'm feeling this. And I think that awareness makes it so that you trust that intuition more. But the other thing that happens is that it makes it so that you don't need to trust it as much because you can see more of the mechanics of intuition, the structure of the intuition. And so it's this ability to recognize these shenanigans. And I think that one of the interesting things about people tend to be kind of cynical about politics, or they at least pretend to be, because they mistake cynicism, I think, for intelligence. So they regard it as a marker or indicator of some kind of intelligence, in the knownness or street smart or something like that, worldliness, you know what I mean? Recognizing that the shenanigans that take place in politics, the shenanigans that take place in religion, the shenanigans that take place in marketing, in selling things, right? that we tend to see all that stuff and say, oh, that's dishonest, it shouldn't be that way. Oh, that's bad. Oh, that's a characteristic of politics. I don't think that's true. Or it's a characteristic of marketing. It's a characteristic of capitalism. You know, it's all the problems with the institutions. The thing is, though, you have to understand those institutions have evolved to thrive in the context of human duplicity. That the thing is, to the extent that these institutions are corrupt, they are usually corrupt because they have recognized certain things about human nature and the reality of human interaction, and they have adjusted themselves to and accommodated and adapted to those characteristics. So the shenanigans that you see in political language are, I think, the result of certain astute individuals over time observing the kind of bullshit that people engage in when they're talking to each other at an unconscious level. What are these just kind of unconscious and automatic, dishonest, what's the structure of dishonesty in everyday human communication? And then they start figuring out how to make it work and how to do it without getting called on it, how to get all the benefits of dishonesty in a given situation without suffering any of the consequences or incurring any of the costs of getting caught. The fact that manipulative tactics work as well as they do is precisely because they have been designed on the basis of what human beings respond to. And so, and when human beings tend to respond to things that they themselves engage in, right? And so I think that one of those things is just beginning to recognize that it's kind of like the Neville thing, you know, what you see in other people or what you see in institutions is something that exists within yourself. And beginning to realize that it's very useful to be able to observe phenomenological realities, which is to say, I'm witnessing something happening in my life. I'm observing. I seem to be seeing something interesting going on in this conversation between two people, or in this conversation I'm having with you, or whatever. I'm detecting that there's something there, and I want to figure out what that thing is. I want to be comfortable. I don't want to rush to the conclusion that I know exactly what it is and stop watching, and to create that comfort of closure. And I also don't want to just ignore it because I don't immediately have sufficient information to form a comforting understanding that I can be really pleased with. I want to be able to watch it and say something's happening and I'm not quite sure what it is. I don't know what it is, but I do know that something's happening here. I do know that it really seems like something's happening here. So I'm either going to see what it is that's actually happening here, or I'm going to see something about the process by which I create within myself a sensation that I'm seeing something going on when there actually isn't really anything going on. And I think it's that willingness to learn, right, rather than to know. Valuing learning over knowing is the essence of kind of resourceful engagement with reality. Whether you're looking at a rock or a plant or some kind of microscopic organism, or you're talking to your partner or your spouse, or observing your own kind of internal dialogue or whatever, it's observing it and not being discomforted by the uncertainty that's there. Like recognizing that sensation and that feeling of uncertainty as like, this is an invitation. This is an invitation for me to keep watching and to form a clearer idea about what's going on. And to learn to be comfortable in the context of being conscious of uncertainty. Because there's always uncertainty. That you always are uncertain about things. It's just, you're not always conscious of it. And oftentimes I think when we're kind of confronted with a clear consciousness of how uncertain we are about something that's important to us, very often we want to rush to a conclusion so that we feel closure, or we want to change the subject so we can just forget about it. So because we don't have to. But when you learn to be comfortable in the presence of it, it's kind of like learning to be comfortable alone. You become very powerful because there's a lot of things to be discovered in silence and a lot of things to be discovered in being alone. You discover things. Sometimes you discover more things about other people being apart from them than you do being with them. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes that contrast allows you to either appreciate or recognize how effed up certain aspects of the most important people in your life are, being away from them. You know what I mean? And so I think it's recognizing that value of awareness and recognizing that I mean, what are you complaining about? What are you unhappy about? What is depriving you of the quality of experience that you deserve? And recognizing that ultimately, at the end of the day, there is something going on with you that is making that happen. And that's not a judgment. That's not even something I'm telling you is true. That's an idea that I found useful in my own life and that allowed me to escape my own bullshit. which is the hardest bullshit to escape. Now, you have to be flexible in how you think about that. There's something about you that's causing you to experience the problems that you're experiencing in your life. Maybe the thing about you that's causing you to experience those problems is the idea that there's something wrong with you and that's why other people don't treat you better than they do. See, even if that's true, right, that you have that idea that there's something wrong with you and that's why no one appreciates you, that's still something about you. It's just not what you think. And so, when people are convinced that they know exactly what's wrong with them, and yet being aware of what's wrong with them isn't causing them to either change what's wrong with them or make it experientially irrelevant, which is to say, build kind of a bypass around what's wrong with them so they can get to the life that they want anyway. If I know what's wrong with me, and that knowledge isn't either creating a change or allowing me to create a change or allowing me to circumvent the need to create a change in order to have the kind of life that I want, what's wrong with me isn't what I think is wrong with me. Probably what's wrong with me is my thinking about what's wrong with me. You see what I'm saying? And the value to recognize that. I have good news and I have bad news. In fact, there is something wrong with you. That's the bad news. The good news is that it's not what you think it is. And the really great news is that once you figure out that it's not what you think it is, and that you realize that in most cases it's what you think about what you think it is, or what you think it is, that's the actual problem, is the fact that you think that it is what you think that it is, not the thing that you think that it is. Very often when you recognize that, that's like the thread that you pull on that causes your whole fucking garment to just disappear. You know what I mean? You keep pulling it and you think it's going to break any second, and it just never does. And before you know it, you've bunched up your shirt, or you know what I'm saying? You've ruined it. You know what I mean? And that's what happens with this stuff. Awareness allows you to do that. It allows you to sort of recognize those things within yourself that make you susceptible to things that other people do that end up causing you to not be happy with your life. And that's really what the responsibility is about. It's like when I'm asking a person to be responsible or proposing responsibility as a solution to life's problems, the thing is, if they don't like that idea, it's usually because they are hearing that idea as the them they have kind of conceived themselves to be. But that's not the person who's responsible, because the them that they have conceived themselves to be very often is, in fact, inadequate and unworthy and stupid and all this different stuff. But the reality of who they are, that's who I'm speaking to. You know what I mean? The background is the conceiver. I'm telling the conceiver, you got to stop conceiving yourself to be that way if you want consequences other than the ones that come as a result of conceiving yourself to be that way. And that's a person's willingness. See, you have to have that ability to see yourself doing assumptions about yourself in order to say, oh, I don't know what life will be like without those assumptions. And then you have a choice about whether you're going to experiment with giving those assumptions up or not, or you're going to give them up permanently or not, or whether you're just going to decide that, well, I don't know what I'm talking about or not. It doesn't matter. But it's about giving you that capacity to choose consciously, and awareness is a prerequisite for that. And so I always am kind of looking at things that are going on in the world at large, and I'm attuned to any tendency within myself to be critical of those things or to condemn or judge those things. And then I sort of say, okay, what does that say about me? Or what version of that exists within me? And I don't do that as a pious exercise or some kind of bullshit like that. It's simply recognizing that there's this matrix that's causing me to, one, even notice this thing, and then to notice it in the way that I am, and to experience it in the way that I am, and to have the kind of judgments about it that I do, regardless of whether those judgments are right or wrong and viewed from a particular moral perspective or whatever. Still, it's interesting that my programming has me concluding this, right? What does that tell me about me? What does that tell me about me? That's the question, always. What does that tell me about me? Someone did this and I reacted this. I was pissed. What does that tell me about me? Not, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That's judgment again. See, you have to at some point shift from judgment to inquiry and curiosity. Somebody broke up with me and I felt the way that I did. What does that tell me about me? I'm in a relationship with someone that I'm really excited about, but I feel blank, and I feel blank. What does that tell me about me? I hate rich people. What does that tell me about me? What does that tell me about me? And becoming more aware of the actual, real, honest answer to that is an extremely useful thing. because the more I learn about myself, the more choices I have about the kind of person I'm going to be. And the more consciously I exercise those choices, the more I'll tend to exercise them in ways that serve me. And the less beholden I will be to groupthink, to what the fuck everyone on social media is talking about. What percentage of people who are on social media do you think are on social media because it's the best thing they could possibly be doing in that moment in time? Really, honestly, what percentage of people are on the internet right now? Internet in general, social media in particular, because they've made a conscious choice that that's the best possible thing they could be doing. And if the answer to that is not a very large percentage, why the fuck do you care about what they're thinking? You know what I mean? And why are you allowing what they're thinking not just to control what you're, or direct what you're thinking, but also what you're thinking about, which is really interesting. And it's not about not doing what they're doing. It's about having a choice about whether you're going to be doing what they're doing. And you can do the exact same thing everyone else is doing, but if you're making a conscious choice to do that thing, you're a different person. You're a more different person if you're consciously choosing to do what other people are unconsciously and automatically choosing to do. You're a more different person than you would be if you were doing the exact opposite of what most people were choosing to do. You know, if you were just reflexively and unconsciously and automatically living on an organic farm somewhere because that's just your reaction to, that's your kind of anti-conformity pattern and program, you're not necessarily any more autonomous than someone working in a cubicle somewhere. But if you're working in a cubicle, because that's what does it for you, you know what I mean? And you're making a conscious choice to do it, you know you can do other things instead. Really, you know it, you feel it in your bones that you have these other options, and you're not constrained by what you've done the last 5 minutes, the last 5 years, or 5 decades, or whatever. Then you're a real person. And that's, as far as I can tell, that's what it's all about.